Hey, welcome to Rob Paints Models. This is how to paint Deathwatch Part 3. Today we're going to be painting the leather, the gold and the snow basing. After watching this part and all the other parts in this series, you should be able to paint a infantry model just like this. The next video in the series will be dealing with vehicles. So what we're going to be doing next is base coating these leather pouches, even these bullets, this special ammo, the handle of the blade here, and this leather strap. We're going to be base coating those with RHINOX hide. So, pretty simple deal here. The reason why I'm doing the handle with RHINOX hide now is I'll be doing it with a gold later. But gold tends to cover better over a warm tone than a cold tone. Oops, I went way too far with that. All fixed. That's a blooper for the bloopers reel. Yes, I'm painting the weapons blade with RHINOX hide because the gold paint that I'll use later will cover better over the RHINOX hide than it will over the Deathwatch black. Also means I can just be a little bit more careless when painting this leather strap at the back here and can get it on the handle. So I'll come back once I finish base coating all these areas. Next, we're going to highlight all of those leather areas with BANEBLADE brown, which is going to be hitting up the edges and maybe doing a couple of little scratches. I haven't thinned this down too much because edge highlights prefer slightly thicker paint. But we don't want it so thick that it globs. So I'm using my Broken Toad size 0 here. Excellent for this kind of work. Just letting it graze the corners of all of these details here. It does dry out very quickly though. Don't worry if it's a bit too big, you can touch it up afterwards. Some straight RHINOX hide. We're also going to be doing a couple of filters over this, which will knock back the highlights a little bit and make it look like it's got layers of leather polish over the top of all these scratches and damage. Just painting a couple of very light scratches in there. The more detail you layer up with leather, the better it looks. So that it looks like there's multiple layers of older damage that's been treated, polished over by the owner of the armor, and then more damage has been sustained later. I will come back once I've done all of those. Okay, so that's those highlights done on the leather. Now what I'm going to do is take some Flayed One Flesh, and I'm just going to do some extra sharper highlights with this, but these are going to be quite thin and quite sparing. Mostly along the top edges of everything, and again simulating damage just by using an erratic pattern. So it's not always a solid line of highlight. As you can see, this is a relatively fast process. you don't have to be super careful with this. I mean, obviously if it's a competition piece, you should be more careful than this. If you get any on the armour, don't worry, none of these pouches are usually in any areas where there's highlights underneath for the armour. So now that we've done that, we're going to get some VMA burnt umber and not drop it on the floor. And we're going to use this as a kind of filter. Now this is a very translucent paint, very translucent because it's model air. We're still going to mix it with a little bit of water, just so that it's very translucent. And we're going to use this effectively as a filter. So we're just going to paint this over everything we've done up to this point on the leather. This essentially simulates our layer of wax or leather polish over the top. And tints everything a slightly nice orangey shade. And then once we've done this, we're going to go back in with the flayed one flesh and just pick out some corners of damaged areas. But you should be able to still see all your scratches still underneath the burnt umber. Now we just need to let that dry. So now we're just going to go back in and touch the edges very carefully. Put those highlights back. This time being more precise in our application. Trying to make sure that we delineate the shapes. Of the pouches and their flaps. So that you can actually see where the details are. Again, if you go over any areas a bit too much, you can just touch it up with a little bit of RHINOX hide. It blends well enough, and like I said, extra texture and detail is what makes leather look like leather, as opposed to just brown plastic. There we go, I think that's enough for those leather areas. The handle of the blade we're going to be doing Screamer Pink. This is also the way I would do the seals for any purity seals. Base coating it with Screamer Pink and then just highlighting it with Pink Horror. Or you could just add some white to your Screamer Pink. They're practically the same colour. You don't need much of this, it's such a simple step. Just try not to get it on the pouch that's always next to it. So the Pink Horror. And we're just going to use this quite thick, but with a very fine brush. And we're just going to use this to highlight the grip. Leaving that Screamer Pink in the gaps. Like so. So lastly, just the blade of the weapon here. And I'm going to use Liberator Gold to paint this. Not doing anything particularly fancy here, just using a small brush. And painting this very carefully. I'm not necessarily going all the way up to the edges, just leaving a line there. Better safe than sorry. So you can see over the RHINOX side it's actually covering quite well, whereas over black this would not cover very well at all. And this is the trickiest bit, painting along the top of the handle. Like so, that's the blade of our dagger. I'm going to use the same Liberator Gold to paint the bullet casings on the bandolier here. And the bullet tips, they wouldn't be brass, they would be copper usually, I believe. Either way, we're doing them in a different metallic colour. So for the heads of the bullets, I'm going to use Balthasar Gold because it's a nice coppery tone. I'm not going to need very much of this, they're very small. Okay. Now that we've painted those in, I'm going to use a little bit of RHINOX hide. And I'm just going to paint down the line here between the blasting cap. Is it a blasting cap? Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. The bit that detonates the bullet to move forwards. And the casing. Because that's clearly been sculpted on. So I'm also going to use this to just go down the side there. Because I've gone over a little bit onto the leather. And lastly, we're going to use a little bit of VMA Chrome to highlight all these metallics that we've just painted. This gold. It's a bit too wet still. Like that. Just get a dot there. Where the reflection's the strongest, and across the top of the blade. There. I'll also make sure the blade has a highlight on it. The blade I painted in the previous stage when I was doing the armour, and at the same time I painted the rest of the metallic details on this. I'm just going to try and get... There we go. Yep. And get the tip of the bullets. It really does do a lot to sell that effect. And that's it. Our Deathwatch Marine is now complete. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make these snow bases that I make. So you're going to need three products, in order to be able to do this. The first is some slate chipping. I got these off eBay. Mini is important. You can just buy slate chippings from your DIY place, but you'll get a big bag that's all different sizes, whereas there are places on eBay which split them up and sort them with big sieves or something into mini chips, and this is the perfect size for the kind of thing we want. One tub of this, didn't cost very much, going to last me forever. You're also going to need some of Citadel's Valhalla Blizzard texture paint. This is great stuff, very good for making snow bases. This is not the same as sandy paste. This appears to be a kind of water effects type material mixed with actual snow flock rather than just with sand. So this stuff is actually really, really great. And you're also going to need Secret Weapon Scenics Crushed Glass. Now you want to be careful with this because it is crushed glass. Don't eat it, don't inhale it, don't rub it into anything. And this just kind of gives it a little bit of a more frozed look. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select a rock and we're going to apply it to our base. So good rocks, good candidates for these infantry guys are like little flat ones like this. Now I'm going to do it with the model on the base. These days I would take the model and paint it pinned to a cork and then make the base and then do this, but I assembled this model about 1.5 years ago and I don't want to take them off the base now because I might damage the paint job. So I'm just going to find a couple of rocks I can put around his base like that. So there's one. Well, that looks like another good one. Due to the posing on these guys, you pretty much always end up with just like 2 rocks, one in front of them, one behind. There's not a lot of variation you can really do unless you start gluing them onto rocks, and that's hard because you have to usually drill a hole through the slate, and your normal pin vise type drill bit will probably get blunted by doing that. I might be able to try and find a very small one to put here. Yeah, something like this. Something like that. That looks good to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use some regular, no-nonsense super glue. Got this from Screwfix. It's very cheap, very thick, and it works really well. So I'm just going to blob it where I want my rocks. And we're just going to glue them on. That'll work. So we just need that super glue to dry, and then we'll be painting is the next stage. Okay, our base is dry, so now we're going to brush on some of this Vallejo black surface primer. So just use a big old brush for this. Okay, our primer's dry, so we're going to base coat the rocks with some VMA dark grey blue. Just slapping this on. It's quite a thin paint, being a model air paint. I think Eshin Grey is relatively close in Games Workshop, but I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head really. I don't have it nearby, so I can't check. Mechanica Standard Grey is pretty close. It's a little bit darker than Mechanica Standard Grey, and a little bit with more blue. Getting full coverage isn't really important because it just adds to the texture of the rock if a little bit of the primer is showing through, as long as it doesn't look like brush strokes and just would look like, say, striations or scratches or just detail in the rock. So we'll let that dry. Okay, that's dry, and now I'm going to take some LONCBEARD Grey, which is a dry paint from GW, and I'm going to use my smallish soft dry brush, and we're just going to dry brush all of the edges with this. So the dry brushing of the rocks essentially gives us a higher contrast version of these stones by the end of it, so it looks like they've got more detail in them and that they're more to scale with the model that's on the base than if we just left them unpainted. So next we're going to use some PRAXETI white. I'm going to do the same thing, just mostly just going to hit the corners, sharpest corners with this. This is to make it a little bit frostier. So there we go, much like that. Now we're going to take some Nuln Oil and we're going to wash those stones. Just kind of making sure it's not pooling too much on the flat surfaces, because we're going to be applying another couple of washes after this. We don't want to obscure all of the colour. We just want this to sit in the tiny cracks that are in the surface of the rock. Now before that's dry, I'm going to get some ATHONIAN CAMOSHADE, and I'm just going to take a little bit of this, and I'm just kind of going to spot it into where the Nuln Oil is, and I'm not going to try and pull this off with the brush. I'm going to let this pool on some surfaces and not on others. I'm just kind of trying to create a mottled green pattern. So that's enough of that. And lastly, I'm going to take some Drakenhof Nightshade and do the same thing. Going to try and avoid mixing the green and the blue too much. This will just give us a little bit more colour variation in our rock. I kind of try and paint this in stripes rather than dots like the ATHONIAN CAMOSHADE, but ultimately wash kind of does whatever it wants and just abides by the laws of fluid dynamics and gravity. It's all a very organic, random process, and that's what we want. So we're going to let those washes dry, and I'll come back to it. Now that our washes are dry, we're going to do one more dry brush. And we're going to be using the PRAXETI white, and we're just going to be doing a light dry brush just to pick out any details that got watered down or dulled down by the wash. There we go, so the rocks are now complete. Just going to dust off the extra dry brush debris. So now we're going to take our Valhalla Blizzard and a sculpting tool. Ow! And stab yourself with the sculpting tool, don't do that. And we're just going to scoop out a little bit. You don't want to pull out too much of this. A little bit actually goes quite a long way because our base is covered in rocks and they're actually taking up a lot of the space between the base and the model. We don't have to cover too much. We're just going to pat it down, trying to get it underneath the feet if they're raised. This stuff stays wet for quite a while, so we've got a good working time here. And we're trying to get it relatively flat, like undisturbed snow. And these guys are trawling through it. Just trying to pull it away from the feet a little bit. Much like that. So I'll get a bit more. Let's get a small bit for this. Here. Just try and work it into the cracks between the rocks. Usually the hardest bit to do is the bit between their legs. Just kind of have to ladle it in there. And then poke it around. So it's starting to look good now. Just this little area here to do. You can see we don't need much to get decent coverage. And it's quite opaque, so you can't see the black base through the snow. Try and get rid of any areas that look like the shape of the tool that you're using. That's what the ball end is quite good for that. And just tapping it down, creating a nice randomish pattern. And there we go, that's the Valhalla Blizzard applied. Now before that dries, we're going to take our crushed glass, and now the problem with Valhalla Blizzard is it's quite shiny while it's wet, but it actually dries quite matte. And it dries matte and incredibly white. Just so bright white. I'm just going to take my guy off his cork here. It's only held on with blue tack. There we go. Now for anything up to a Terminator, this works. For anything bigger, you'll have to start spooning it on. I'm just taking my crushed glass, dunking the base in, giving it a twist, getting it all nice and covered, tapping off the excess, and there will be quite a lot of excess. And that will give it a little bit of a sparkle once it dries. And that's basically it. Once that's dry, we just paint the rim of the base black again, and our snow base is complete. There will be links to where you can buy all of these products in the doobly-doo, but then I may not be able to provide a link for getting slate pieces, as the suppliers of those on eBay usually change every couple of months. So I've painted the rim of my base there, it's still drying at the moment. But while that's drying, I'm going to apply a coat of Galleria matte varnish. I'm just going to apply that to all of the non-metallic areas on the model with a paintbrush straight from the pot, just to try and kill the shine that some of these GW paints has left. Give it a really good shake. Very, very good shake, as the talc will settle to the bottom if you don't. And I use this basically straight from the pot, because if you thin it down, then you're actually not going to get as matte of a finish. And it does flow nicely straight out of the pot, so that's fine. Also, if you have used any washes, this will even out the finish. Sometimes GW washes will leave a difference, not in colour, but in finish. They can dry very matte in some areas and quite glossy in others. So applying a matte coat afterwards, or a gloss coat, will even out the finish. And it takes about 24 hours for it to fully dry, and you actually start to see the matte effect. You can start to see it within a couple of hours, but it really takes about 24 hours for it to fully start matting down. So if it looks quite glossy at first, leave it a full day. And if it still looks glossy, you didn't shake the bottle enough. That's what it basically boils down to. Or you applied too much. Applying too much can result in a glossy finish, as can not shaking the bottle properly. If we get it on some of the metallics, it's not a big deal. I just want to make sure I don't get it on that shoulder pad or the knife. So there we go. That's it. Deathwatch infantry, all done. It's the same technique for all of the infantry, just slightly different applications. So the next video will be on a vehicle. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked and subscribed and shared the video and all of that good stuff. Leave a comment if you like what you see. Leave a comment if you have any suggestions for what you'd like the vehicle to be that you want me to paint. I have some Razorbacks and some Rhinos. I already painted my Corvus Blackstar, so I can't do that unless I get another one, which I can't afford. Yeah, if you are a patron and you're watching this early, then thank you. Thank you for your support. If you would like to watch these videos a whole week before the rest of the internet sees them, then you will need to get on my Patreon. There will be a link on the screen somewhere, and in the doobly-doo, and so on. So there we go. Deathwatch Space Marines. Infantry parts complete. Bye.